Hello, good morning everyone. I'm Peter Williamson, CEO of Automate UK, and I'm joined today at our budget briefing by John Arnold, Public Affairs Consultants, to discuss the content and impact of yesterday's budget, followed by a conversation around the current state of play in the run-up to the general election later this year. Before we start, I would just like to take this opportunity to give a brief update on Automate UK. Since rebranding late last year, we have seen a very positive response from existing membership, as well as a healthy influx of new members, drawn by the clear focus of the group of associations. Our 2024 shows, Automation UK and NVC in June, and PPMA show in September, are both showing growth in size and number of exhibitors from 2023. And we expect to increase the volume of highly relevant visitors with demand for our exhibitors' products. We've launched the UK Automation Forum in conjunction with the MTC, Manufacturing Technologies Association, Gambika and Make UK. The forum will debate and discuss the key challenges facing the UK in greater adoption of automation and provide calls to action for government and industry to ensure that greater automation is central to the future success of manufacturing in the UK. I've also been appointed as affiliate member chair at Make UK and will be working closely with them to help drive the agenda of automation as being central to an industrial strategy. It is great to see that Make UK have added ambitions to see the UK move up the table of robot density from our current lowly 24th in the world. The recent appointment sits well with our ambitions to become a more influential voice on behalf of our members as we lobby government both independently and in conjunction with our partners such as Make UK. We've appointed a Chief Technology Officer to drive forward key initiatives around robot and vision integration, as well as becoming a central point of knowledge on standards and technologies relevant to our members. We are shortly going to be launching our Export Week. This will be a week of webinars and training supported by a face-to-face event in Birmingham, where we'll be looking to provide practical support to help our members export. We will cover topics such as giving information and guidance on how to identify and penetrate new markets, working through export regulation and paperwork, and explaining how Automate UK will support our international trade shows. Finally, we will soon be launching our new Machinery Finder service that will strive to provide genuine leads and opportunities for our members' companies. So, on to yesterday's budget. As I mentioned earlier, joining us today is leading public affairs consultant John Arnold. John, can you explain for us the key points of the budget yesterday and perhaps give us some insight into the thought processes behind it?
Yes, good morning everybody, and thank you for that introduction, Peter. Let me first of all talk a little bit about the personalities. So first of all, as we know, there is always an interesting relationship between a Prime Minister and a Chancellor. And we go back to Mrs. Thatcher and Geoffrey Howe, Mrs. Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, and most famously probably Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Well, I can tell you this morning that it's no different between Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. There were differing views on what should be in the budget. So to give you Rishi's position, he wanted a 2% income tax cut. Now, for those of you who aren't Treasury aficionados, a 1% income tax cut basically costs £7 billion. So Rishi wanted a 2p cut, so costing 14 billion. Jeremy objected and wanted a national insurance cut, which he got on the basis that he wanted to be more prudent. A national insurance cut only costs 5 billion. A penny national insurance cut costs 5 billion, so 10 billion in all-ish. He won the day. Now, Rishi was saying, and this will interest you, that actually we shouldn't change the non-dom current arrangements. I don't know whether there was any personal interest in that, but that would have then given more money to the government to do income tax cuts instead of national insurance. Jeremy Hunt put up a big fight. Number 10 leaked most of the stuff that was going to be in the budget in the hope that that would force Jeremy to rustle up income tax cuts at the last minute so he could pull something out of his hat on the day. That didn't come to pass, and therefore everything that was in the budget had already been pre-released. There was no magic at all and no stardust, which really disappointed Conservative MPs up and down the place. Bizarrely as well, the Prime Minister was really obsessed with giving film a break, and there was a couple of things that helped the British film industry. And I would suggest that he may be looking to his next role. I'm not suggesting he's going to be a film star, but in the film industry. So I'd say watch this space. Jeremy was thinking more, let's call it more prudently, in respect of the long term and the impacts that that budget will have. He was looking particularly at the general election. So Labour have three things that they've said they will increase or scrap. One was non-dom, so they've taken that off the table for Labour. The second was increasing the windfall tax on North Sea oil. They've taken that off the table. So the only thing that Labour say they're going to do is scrap the VAT on private education, which is a small amount. That then puts the onus onto the Labour Party into how are they going to fund their future plans. And let's just talk a little bit about the budget itself in respect to for members. Things like full expensing to apply to lease assets will benefit Automate UK members. You're aware of the national insurance cuts, both for full-timers to 8p and for self-employed to 6p. Industrial zones in the north of England and the Midlands will kick off in April. So again, there's opportunities there. Advanced manufacturing got 270 million for R&D for the automation and the aerospace industry. There'll be changes to the pensions regulations so that if people move jobs, they can take their pots with them. This will be consulted on in detail and at depth, but that's something that members need to be cognizant of moving forward. 120 million went into supply chain, or the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, which was for supply chains. And the Future Development Corporation in Cambridge is getting funding in a year's time. Well, we won't hold our breath in that respect. And there is going to be a lot of public sector, how would we call it? Tightening budgets, tightening the purse strings in the public sector. Now, the public sector have never been very good at this, ever. So some of those figures in that budget for public sector cuts won't come to pass. And indeed, this morning, I was reading a report from Citibank, which said that the budget is already fiscally offside in their eyes by about 60 billion, which seems a lot of money, but they are saying that the current figures and their current figures suggest that they're 20-25 billion off, and then there's another 30 to 35 moving forward from public sector cuts that won't happen, that won't be able to be done. So the government will need to spend that money because they won't receive the cuts. I think on the Today programme this morning, the Chancellor was called a fiscal drag queen because the thresholds have stayed the same and more people are paying tax. And we have the biggest tax burden for, well, in living memory, I think, to be honest. And that doesn't look like in the short term it's going to change. We are where we are in that respect, which is going to be very challenging. And I think some of the city institutions looking at the OBR figures, the Office of Budget Responsibility, indicated that the productivity forecasts, so the OBR had forecast 0.9% increase in coming years, year on year. Now, that's ambitious, given that we haven't done that for a long time. So they minded to say 0.5 productivity increase, which really does impact the fiscal calculations quite significantly. The OBR also said inflation will be down at 2%. And again, I think that's viewed as quite ambitious. Energy and things like that, if they can energy prices, if they continue to drop, will have a significant impact. But there are quite a few inflationary pressures going into the economy, which I think most people think will keep inflation above that 2% Bank of England target. So if you're looking at interest rates and reductions in interest rates, I think you'd be looking longer term. So let's call it the August Bank of England MPC session would be the session where they reduce interest rates, I think, first. I don't think it will become before that. That's probably all on the budget. It's a very political budget in respect of trying to catch Labour. It's done nothing in respect of the polls. The polls haven't moved at all. And speaking to Conservative contacts last night, they didn't expect the polls to move at all because it's not a poll moving budget. It's pretty bland. And the reaction, I think, from the city this morning signifies that there are more problems ahead, I think, for the economy. And Rishi is also down. When he was Chancellor, he said he was going to reduce the income tax rate by a penny. He's not done that by 2024, and he said it was all costed. So I think that's going to hang around his neck moving forward.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, John. Just before we move on with a bit of some questions that I have for John around sort of the wider political situation at the moment, if any people on the call today want to ask any questions of John or indeed myself, then please just use the Q&A function that exists within the Zoom call. So, as I said, now for a bit of a wider discussion around the current political landscape in the UK. So, John, what do you think will be the likely outcome of the forthcoming local elections?
So, these elections, the 2024 local government elections, are predominantly in municipalities. For example, London. Traditionally, Labour do better. Now, you go back 4 years to 2020, those local elections didn't take place. They took place in 2021, and actually the Conservatives did quite well. So the Conservatives, from a little bit of a high, expect to get an absolute kicking in these elections, and that's a term. I sat next to, about 2 weeks ago, I sound as though I go out for lunches all the time. I honestly don't, Peter. But I sat next to the person who's in charge of Conservative candidates. And he thought that the Conservatives at the election would be down to 100 MPs. I thought that was quite low. But at the local government elections, he thought they could be in danger of getting absolutely annihilated in some cities. That's how bad it was. The pressure for Rishi Sunak then is that after that, you've had a budget yesterday. You then get that tested at a local government elections on the 2nd of May, and the Conservative backbenchers go, oh my word, he's never going to, he's not the man who's going to take us into the election. We need to get rid of him. So that will be his maximum point of pressure in respect of his leadership. And I'm not saying he's going to be challenged, but you will certainly have people coming out saying, we can't go on like this. This is terrible. In addition to the, if you can call them, usual suspects and the people who absolutely love Boris Johnson.
So do you think the outcome of these local elections will have an impact on the timing of the next general election? And of course, the golden question is, when that election does come around, what do we think will be the outcome?
Yeah. My understanding is that the Conservatives are working to a date of the 14th of November for the election. Now, I think the opportunities for the election are October, November, or January. So they're currently working to the 14th of November, with the idea being that the Conservative Party conference, first week in October, Rishi does his speech and announces he's going to call the election on the 14th of November. He has a long election campaign, 5-6 weeks, and hopes that Labour blow up.
Right.
That's the strategy. And in the meantime, things like national insurance reductions, growth coming back to the economy, maybe, and I put maybe, a plane takes off from Rwanda with actually somebody on it, and that there isn't that many boats coming across the channel, and those are all, question mark factors.
Yeah.
Those are all the things that they hope turn for them, and there begins to be a recognition of that in the polls. Now, on the other side, Ipsos, which is the oldest polling company, I think, in the UK, in the most recent poll had the Conservatives at 20%, which is it's very, very, very low.
Yeah.
Without going into expletives. I don't think their vote is that low, but they're in big, big trouble. So the question is, when's the election going to be in the 14th of November? And your next obvious question is, who's going to win? Yeah. Labour will win by a landslide, Peter. You heard it here first. You may have not heard it here first, but I think the Conservative MPs know they're going to lose.
Yeah.
The machine knows they're going to lose, and it's just how bad that defeat will be. But I think most of them, and this is the Conservative Party machine and their MPs, think it will be on a scale of 1997. And if you think, so in Scotland, Labour have picked up. Now, they did disastrously in 2019 with a seat, 2 seats now. For every 8 seats Labour picks up in Scotland, Labour needs 1% less of a swing in England and Wales, let's say. Yeah. So, for example, if Labour got 24 seats, which is well within, achievable means for Labour in Scotland at the moment, given the polls, that would mean a 3% drop in swing, and that becomes, very, very important in terms of the number of seats in England and Wales. So I think Labour wouldn't say this. Labour would say, everything to play for, etc., etc., and they will be very cautious. And I think we've talked about manifestos before. The Labour Party manifesto will be full of photographs and full of platitudes, but with not that much detail in there. And as you know, the Sue Gray, who we know from infamy, who's now Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer, has been having all the shadow cabinet ministers in going through their part of the manifesto, seeing whether it adds up. And that's been a grueling process for some of them. Some of them have sailed through 1 meeting, 2 meetings. Some of them have had 6, 7, 8 meetings and got basically battered. And the reason she wants them on the metal is that access talks with the civil service have started. And that means, so if you are the Shadow Secretary of State for Business, you go and meet the permanent secretary in the Department for Business and Trade and say, this is my manifesto. The permanent secretary says, oh, that's very interesting. And the director generals and directors around, and they go away. And then in 2 weeks' time, Johnny Reynolds will go back and permanent secretary say, well, this is how we think we would implement your manifesto. However, there's a problem with this, or, X, Y, and Z, or this won't work. And there's a bit of back and to. It's hoped that that process will be done by Easter. This never comes out in the public, but it's done before every election. So yeah. The civil service work a bit harder when it's a government or an opposition that's likely to be in power. Hence, in 2019, I'm sure they weren't putting in the big licks when Labour, John McDonnell went in, etc. But now I think it's taken quite seriously. So that's the background process. So Labour's manifesto is all but written. When the election is called, they'll have a Clause 5 meeting, which means they'll meet the unions, the National Executive, and the Labour leader. And in old parlance, it's the smoke-filled room with beer and sandwiches to chat through. There's probably no smoking or beer now, but maybe just sandwiches and avocado. they will then agree the manifesto, but it's pretty much written, but it'll be very anodyne. And that will take them into the general election. If, and you say November the 14th is what the Conservatives are working to. If the Conservatives are still on 20 points in the poll, in polls, then he'll leave it till January and for a Hail Mary, over Christmas and New Year that picks them up. Because no one's going to go to the electorate when they're they're in for an absolute battering. But so I say the 14th of November is the one they're working to. If the polls are really awful, then he'll delay to January, and that'll upset everyone because it'll be electioneering, people knocking on your doors between Christmas and New Year, which is always popular.
Yes. So if we take a wild leap then into the future and make the massive assumption that Labour are going to win, it's a fairly safe assumption. What do we think the first 12 months of a potential Labour government might look like?
Yeah, good point. So, I think the first 12 months of a Labour government will be influenced by the state of the economy and what the circumstances are that they will inherit. In my view, and I think they're beginning to wise up to the seriousness of what they've now seen yesterday, and the reality is that their room for manoeuvre will be really, really limited. Because if you look at things like spending in the public sector, health and education are ring-fenced, so they go up. Jeremy Hunt said yesterday that other areas would go up by 1%. Well, that's below inflation, so that's basically a cut. And if health and education are going up significantly and the others aren't, some of them are going to get real-time cuts. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking of the Department of Work and Pensions, Ministry of Justice, Home Office, where are those defence, where are those cuts going to come? And that's going to be a really hard thing for Labour. It's hard to make the cuts, but what will be harder potentially is where do they get the revenues from? Because the Shadow Chancellor's begun to box herself in a little bit in terms of tax raising or things she said in respect of income tax, not increasing corporation tax. Briefing last night that there wasn't going to be a wealth tax, golly gosh, how are you going to raise money then? I think some of those may need to be revisited at some point. I mean, you go back to Keir Starmer's dropping of his 28 billion commitment, which is a very interesting. So Starmer, Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband met on the Monday before he dropped it on the Thursday, and they agreed that they were going to drop it on the Thursday. He then went and did an interview with Times Radio, Kate McCann, where he basically doubled down on the 28 billion. This was the day after. And, most people in his office thought was crackers because he knew it was going to be scrapped on the Thursday. And just for information, so on the Thursday, all the lobby journalists, and that's the political journalists who work in Westminster, were invited into the leader's office. So there's Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. The first question up, Sir Keir, is this your decision? Yes, this is my decision. And Rachel Reeves, it's not a dafty. She went, oh, right, okay. And whenever questions came in to her, she said, yes, I support the leader's decision, i.e.,
yeah,
my shoulders have sloped off. She then went to meet the Parliamentary Labour Party with Ed Miliband, tipped Ed the wink that actually the leader was going to take all the credit or not for the cut or the dropping of the 28 billion pledge. And they all said, we support the Sir Keir's decision to drop it. So I think, and comes back to Sue Gray again, Sue Gray's view was that he should have just left the decision to the budget, 6th of March, said, the fiscal backdrop's terrible, we can't do this at the moment, and it's lost in the budget. He decided not to, against her advice, and I think has now begun to wise up that actually maybe his chancellor isn't as friendly as he thought she was, and that Ed Miliband maybe not his best friend either.
Right.
And you think back to who he appointed as his first chancellor, it was Annalise Dodds, and then he moved and brought Rachel in. So all politics is interesting. So just as a bit of background, the political journalist left the leader's office, and political journalists just, apart from going to the bar and out for long lunches, chat amongst themselves. And their analysis was, we thought Sir Keir would be a better prime minister than he was leader of the opposition. Now they worry that he's maybe politically naive, and also he holds up decisions, i.e. there's a bottleneck in decision making. Now, you think of the last person who was prime minister who created a bottleneck in decision making, and that was Gordon Brown, whose premiership was an absolute disaster because everything had to go through him. He wouldn't make decisions until the last minute, and the whole machinery of government started to fall apart. And you do wonder, I think the press are now onto this, that could be the situation moving forward for Starmer and Starmer's number 10 when and if Labour win the next election. But coming back to Automate UK and industrial policy. So Johnny Reynolds could not be more business friendly. He's good on his feet. He's open to new ideas, and he is constructive, and he doesn't have a huge ego. Not all those things are seen in modern day politicians. So he is a breath of fresh air, which can be welcomed by the business community. Now, what I would say in terms of industrial strategy, which is one of the fundamental things, the Business and Trade Select Committee under the chairmanship of Liam Byrne is currently looking at industrial policy and industrial strategy. And there's lots of, and I think Peter's engaged with that their recommendations, I think, will lead to a lot of shaping of a future Labour government's actual industrial strategy and policy. So they've already announced things like a industrial strategy council, so they'll be listening to business. Now, we've all heard that before. The great and the good go on a committee. It meets once or twice and then, doesn't meet for 18 months. But I think there'll be more engagement, and there will be more opportunity to input into actually what that policy should look like. And I think that's, from an SME basis, from a trade association basis. And I think if you think of the CBI's recent travails, that has opened the door for Make UK and indeed Automate UK to get in there, basically, and really influence in a serious way about things and you're the experts. So things like skills, you're pushing at an open door with both business and the shadow education secretary. And when it comes to support for the people you need going into your industry at the grassroots, if you like, then I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunity to influence that, and across the piece, actually. So there really are opportunities, and I know you're working away on that at the moment, Peter.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it's quite refreshing to see some of the comments that have been coming out from both sides of the political divide recently. And I mean, you mentioned earlier about where's the revenue going to come from. It seems to me that the Labour Party have pinned all their hopes on growth, which should be good news for our members, because manufacturing has to fulfil a central part of that growth. And I think that there's an opportunity for increased productivity, and of course it's our members and their technology and their products which really support and help in that. And we are, as you said earlier, we're engaging with both sides Obviously, we're hedging our bets a little bit in terms of our level of engagement as well, but we try to encourage what we see as being automation being central to an industrial strategy moving forward, and making sure that when we're looking at how we can increase productivity and how we can have sustainable growth, manufacturing with automation at the heart of it is absolutely essential. And it's quite refreshing that it's a topic that's being mentioned more and more on both sides, and it's clearly something that is starting to be actually a real policy point. And for those of us that have been involved in manufacturing over the last 20-25 years, it doesn't even get a mention most of the time when you're talking about policy. And yet, clearly for us in that world, it's something that we take very personally, but it's also, we believe so central to the success of an economy such as the UK. And on that point, I think seeing Make UK have that commitment, yes, we really want an industrial strategy, but when you look deeper into it, within that industrial strategy, actually using the robot deployment as being a key measure of how well automated and how successful we are. At the moment, we're 24th in the world, and we're behind some pretty small nations in terms of robot density. And we're a large manufacturing nation. We really have to adopt these new technologies and drive forward. And there's lots of things that the government can do. So we've listened to our members. We put out our sort of manifesto for automation. It's interesting when you go to these Make UK meetings and you hear from other people in other industry associations in manufacturing. The challenges and problems that we face are all very, very similar. At the top of that list is skills and recruitment and bringing in new people into the industry. And at one end you've got the skills retiring earlier, and at the other end you've got an educational system that's not really that strong in terms of delivering the types of employees that we need moving forward. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through from the audience. I thought I'd just fire them across and have a bit of a chat about them, really. So the first question we've got is around skills, and it's around the apprenticeship levy. The question is do we think there'll be any changes to the apprenticeship levy and how that's structured with a new Labour government?
Yes, is the answer. Absolutely guaranteed. Seema Malhotra is the Shadow Minister for Education and Skills, and she is committed to listening to industry to make the skills levy work rather than wasting that opportunity. So now I'm not going to say what it will look like because I think we're a bit early there, but it absolutely guaranteed it will change. And I think your point on productivity in Labour is absolutely spot on. They are pinning their hopes to productivity and growth gains, which is, we all want that. But in a backdrop for you, I mean, currently I think we've got let's say 900,000 job vacancies in the UK, which we are more and more dependent on filling from overseas.
Yeah.
Post EU, etc. AI is the sexiest thing in the world, but actually, in a high rising AI tide, you do quite well. You and your members will do very well because AI can be. I'm not saying some politicians aren't the sharpest tools in the shed, but they can lose what exactly AI is all about. Whereas Automate and your members are doing real things which they understand. They can see those factories, they can see that development, they can see the inputs. And so, and this is, I think, what you're going to do in terms of run up to the election, get prospective candidates to come and visit members. And the Labour Party, I think, have a form which you can send to them to get candidates to come. And I think doing that is a sensible approach because you will build a basis of support across the new MPs coming into Westminster for automation and what you want. So when it comes to skills, changing the levy, getting the best levy that you want, and I know you're communicating with members to what that would look like,
Yeah.
But no, it's a wide open door in respect of Labour for that, and it will absolutely definitely happen. I imagine it will happen within the first year. That's how confident, because it's a relatively small amount of money, but it has a real bang for your buck type multiplier on it.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, from the conversations that we've been having, getting people into apprenticeships doesn't just over a period of time narrow the skills gap, but it also narrows the immediate gap that you've got in terms of volume of people in jobs. You know, I'm not saying that it wasn't laudable to try and get more and more people to go to university, but it should be the right people going to university that have the right skills or want to pursue the right careers. And the route through to a career in manufacturing hasn't necessarily been that easily signposted, because the route through apprenticeships hasn't been there in the same way. And I think doing things to change the levy to make it easier and more accessible, particularly for smaller businesses, you can then pretty quickly start filling some of these jobs with people that maybe felt they ought to go to university, but probably an apprenticeship was actually a better route, and they're straight in the workplace at that point.
Yeah, so it's going to change, and I think the attractiveness needs to be in a monetary sense. You know, it needs to be easy to operate from SMEs. There needs to be opportunities for SMEs to collaborate, you know, to pool their levy and things like that. And I think if there's a monetary benefit, then it will be done, but it needs to be easily understood. But no, definitely. I mean, you are absolutely in the sweet spot there.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't be positioned better.
Good. Okay. We've got one other question, and this might be a bit of a tricky one to answer, but we'll ask it anyway. Assuming Labour do win the next election, will there be any surprises in his first cabinet?
That's a good question. Well, I would say possibly yes, question mark. Possibly yes, question mark. The reason I say that is that he currently has more shadow ministers than there are government positions. So some of them are going to be disappointed.
Right.
He has also, and this probably speaks to his political naivety, he's also asked some of the former MPs to come back, or, you know, they've stood for selection and won selection, and they're likely to be MPs again. And one I particularly point out is Douglas Alexander, who was very involved, you know, former cabinet minister, very involved in the Gordon Brown era. Now, anyone who knows Douglas will know that he won't be coming back to be sat on the back benches for 5 years. So the immediacy of him being in Westminster, he'll be speaking to all the lobby journalists saying, you know, I really should be Chancellor, I really should be Foreign Secretary. And so it's going to create a pressure. You know, the journalists will feed on, you know, briefings with someone like Douglas to get people like that back. So I would say it's not impossible that someone like Douglas Alexander gets appointed. He could appoint a Lord, don't think Lord Mandelson would leave. It was very, very lucrative consultancy firm, but someone like that is possible. And for example, someone like David Miliband is not impossible, I think. But we'll just have to wait and see. And just going on to the election quickly, I always get accused of missing out the Lib Dems. So they've currently got 15 seats. I think in the election they'll have 30 seats. I think Labour won't need them in any coalition, and there would be no official coalition like there was in 2010. Quickly, if Sir Keir was to fall under a bus tomorrow or very early in his premiership, who are the runners and riders? There are probably 4. Wes Streeting, Darren Jones, Rachel Reeves, and Angela Rayner. And if you're a betting man, I would say it'd be probably West Streeting at the moment. But if you had, let's say, where's Darren and Rachel sort of on the middle or right of the Labour Party, and Angela's to the left. If you have three candidates from the right, it can often allow the person to the left to come through. So, people write off Angela Rayner. I wouldn't quite write her off yet, but anyway, I don't think she will be the next leader. But events, dear boy, as someone very wisely said. And just quickly coming back to the Conservatives and post Rishi. Rishi will be on the first flight out to California after the election. He's likely to be then a leadership election with Penny Mordaunt, Kemi Badenoch, Grant Shapps if he's still got a seat, and possibly Suella Braverman. So the Conservative Party is probably going to swing, I would say, to the right.
Yeah.
There is huge pressure, and Nigel Farage was at the Conservative Party conference last year talking to anyone who would listen, saying, I'd love to come back. I'd really love to come back. And Rishi said there's no problem with him coming back, but the Conservative Party are doing everything they possibly can to try and rule him out. But what I would say is that Reform will win 2,500 seats in each, votes in each seat, which will do for a lot of Conservative MPs.
Yeah.
But watch this space in that 12 months for a movement with Priti Patel, Liz Truss and others saying, actually, we should bring Nigel Farage back into the Conservative Party. If that happens, once he's in, he will, in the end, be the leader of the Conservative Party. So watch this space. Okay,
thanks for that. Just got one final comment that's just come in, and again, it's back on sort of the realms of training. They say that they regularly get offers for paid management training, but it never falls down the route of actually paid for technical training, which is kind of what they actually really need and want. I think when you go back to the apprenticeship levy, and you look at the way that the levy is spent, it is only on certain apprenticeships. It can't be used for general training. It can only be used for specific actual government approved apprentices. And I think probably when you talk to our membership, having a training levy rather than an apprenticeship levy, which provides regular technical training and the right training for what they actually need within manufacturing is important. Clearly, management training is an important part of making sure your business is fit for purpose. But if you've got highly trained managers and no one working for them, okay, yes, we want to promote more automation underneath that, but at the end of the day, you've got to have the skills around it. So when we talk about the apprenticeship levy, and I know we can't be too drawn on it, but do we think that evolving it so it moves away from just being apprenticeships to a wider training one?
No, it's semantics. It's semantics. So you will never get them to drop apprenticeship as a phrase, and it's cross-party. People love talking about apprentices. Yeah. It's a politically sexy term. But if you change it to apprenticeships and training levy, and you say actually within the levy, half can be spent on, training.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be on apprenticeships. That's eminently achievable.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what we're asking for and what we're pushing for, because the amount of training that doesn't get funded, that could get funded with the huge swathes of apprenticeship levy that gets handed back to the government every year is massively frustrating.
Yeah.
We were at a recent event and there was a company there, a big multinational, who said, look, if you want money, we've got pots of it. If we can avoid giving it back and we can spend it on sharing the levy with other, with your member companies, we would happily do that. And I think for us, it's a case of how we make that happen. But if the members haven't got the relevant apprenticeships, then they can't get access to that money, and having access through training would be far more effective.
So bizarrely, you're not the first person or the first trade association to have raised exactly this point.
Yeah.
And I think it's a point understood by the education team and the business team, to be fair. However, what I would say, the question mark would be the civil service, who go, computer says no.
Yeah.
And that would be the danger of not having some of those Labour ministers standing up to the civil service and saying, actually, what industry want is whether it's a 50-50 scheme, you've got apprenticeship and training levy, or whether there's flexibility within, and I think that's what you and others need to nail down before the election, so that actually there's a blueprint for what it really looks like, and that then pressures the civil service to deliver it like that, rather than saying, oh no, it's just for apprenticeships.
Sure.
Because that suits the HMRC and the Treasury, because they get money back.
They get money back. Yeah, exactly.
All politics is local, so yeah, I think it's nailing that down now, pretty so that Seema is saying that, and that's what she wants, or that's what they want, rather than leaving to some civil servants in the Treasury just to come with their big baseball bats and duff them up. I'm not saying that's what happens, but that's what happens.
Yeah. Okay, well, it looks like we've exhausted the questions. So thanks for joining us today, John. For any of the members who've attended, and for anyone that may watch this later on, if you want to understand more about what we're trying to do as an association in liaison with government and getting the point of view of our members across, please have a look at our manifesto for automation, which is on our website. If there's anything that you feel passionately about, want to add, want to encourage us as an association to engage with government about, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be very keen to do that. We'll continue to work with people such as John to kind of drive this agenda forward and work on behalf of our members with what, after today's conversation, it looks like will probably be a Labour government in the later on this year. So thanks, John. Thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll catch up again soon.